Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the March 13, 2023 regularly scheduled meeting of the Rockingham County Planning Board and Board of Adjustment. At this time, Chair calls upon Mr. James Fink for our invocation.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to come together tonight to represent the fine citizens of Rockingham County. We pray that you give us the wisdom to hear the cases on its merits and make a decision that's both productive for the county and the citizens that we represent. We ask that you be with us tonight, Lord, and help us make good decisions. Be with our law enforcement, our emergency EMTs, and our military as well. And these things we ask in God's name, amen.
Next item on our agenda is adoption of the agenda.
Just one quick note that somebody might notice. In the packet that was emailed, the tax pin for case 06 was copy and pasted incorrectly, but I have corrected it. And in the written packets that you have and the new official agenda, it's correct. I just want to make sure you knew that.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the agenda or adopt the agenda. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Vote's unanimous and the agenda is adopted. Our next item is approval of the January 29th, 2023 minutes. And I remind you that we did not have a meeting in February, so the January minutes are of our last meeting.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Before we vote, there is one small change. If you will look on page 2 of the minutes, in the very first paragraph, it begins reading, Mr. Cochran presented the appeal request. It's the application request. So if you'll just change that one word.
I already have that corrected in the prepared written minutes.
I amend my motion to include that correction.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the January 9th, 2023 minutes. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Again, the unanimous vote, the minutes are approved. Ladies and gentlemen, this board serves both as the Planning Board and Board of Adjustment, and we are going to convene as the Board of Adjustment. This hearing is a quasi-judicial evidentiary hearing. That means it's like a court hearing. State law sets specific procedures and rules concerning how this board must make its decision. These rules are different from other types of land use decisions like rezoning cases. The board's discretion is limited. The board must base its decision upon competent, relevant, and substantial evidence in the record. A quasi-judicial decision is not a popularity contest. It is a decision constrained by the standards in the ordinance and based on the facts presented. If you will be speaking as a witness, please focus on the facts and standards, not personal preference or opinion. Participation is limited. This meeting is open to the public. Everyone is welcome to watch. Only parties withstanding have rights to participate fully. Parties may present evidence, call witnesses, and make legal arguments. Parties are limited to the applicant, the local government, and individuals who can show they will suffer special damages. Other individuals may serve as witnesses when called by the board. General witness testimony is limited to facts, not opinions. For certain topics, this board needs to hear opinion testimony from expert witnesses. These topics include projections about impacts on property values and projection about impacts of increased traffic. Individuals providing expert opinion must be qualified as experts and provide the factual evidence upon which they base their expert opinion. Witnesses will be required to swear or affirm their testimony. At this time, we're going to call upon staff to present our case before the Board of Adjustment.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It's kind of weird because we didn't have our February meeting. It's like it's been forever. But on this occasion is one of the rare occasions that we will go out of numerical order. We go in numerical order on a first-come, first-served, keep everything very fair for everyone. But because you guys have to function as Board of Adjustment and then the other items are legislative, there would have been a cumbersome back and forth of switching duties, so we put this case first. That makes sense? Okay. And I need to clarify some things, too. This request is actually to vary from the rear yard setbacks in the RA district. If you recall, last year we approved a new dimensional standards table, and the rear setback in the RA district went up to 20 feet. The applicant, there was some miscommunication, too, about what the front setback is, what the back setback is inside. Essentially, the applicant is requesting that he be able to set up a home that encroaches on the rear property line by a certain number of feet. And we can get the exact number from him. He's quite knowledgeable. It does not involve the front property line, which was partially mentioned in the narrative. That's the only one thing I wanted to clarify before we move forward. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. 1818 Stone Mountain Road in Stoneville. And this is just a parcel map that shows you sort of the parcel outline and where it sits. All of the properties around it are a bit larger and zoned residential agricultural. This is a copy, can you see? Yeah, a copy of the survey that was done for the parcel. David Vaughn did this, and David Vaughn sketched in the 35-foot front yard setback and where it lines up with the other setbacks. The rear would be the north-south property line, and then the one on the furthest south horizontal would be the side property line. This one only has one side property line because of the shape. This was just for your information. This is information taken from the tax map. The number measurements along each line are the reported length of each. Western line being 238.82, road frontage 308.88, and southern line 121.85. This was a site plan that the applicant sketched up. He is proposing to place a single-wide manufactured home on the parcel, which is allowed in the RA district. He cites several factors that he feels like impede him from being able to completely meet the setbacks, such as the location of a couple of other structures on the parcel, the dedicated septic tank and drain field area, and the well and the setbacks required from the rail. And just keep in mind, I always reiterate this with the variances. I'm not going to read all four of these, but as you know, all four of these must be met to grant the variance. And since there are 6 people here tonight, it would take a unanimous vote either way. And I'll stop with that. I believe, Mr. Walls, are you here? Okay. Hey, I thought I saw you come in. The applicant, Mr. Walls, is here, and he's able to answer questions. But if you have something for me, let me know. I'll be glad to answer
There were
anything.
already structures there, that's why I was asking for it.
Lynn, I noticed that the introduction here from your department says that this site is, this parcel is 0.33 acres.
It is.
Yet the surveyor says that it's 0.529 acres. What's the difference there? Why the discrepancy there?
Oh, it's the survey versus the tax map. I would have taken the measurements from the tax map, which can sometimes be erroneous, and I apologize for that. I did not catch that discrepancy.
Okay.
We will go with what the surveyor says as the size. Now, one significant difference is this is one of those parcels where the front property line extends into the right-of-way of the road.
Right.
So technically, he owns that property. However, it won't be taxed and it can't be used because it's in the state road right-of-way.
I understand.
Which
Thank you.
takes it down to .33 because of that extra that's basically in the roadway.
One other question. The older inspection that was done, this goes back to 1982, shows that there was a family of 3 here on this site, and Mr. Walls states that there's now a family of 5. And I'm just wondering that regardless of the difference in the sizes of the site that we're talking about, is the carrying capacity of that, since it seems to be a significantly smaller parcel than others in that area, is the carrying capacity of that site, given the size of the site and the existing well and septic systems that are there, is that sufficient for a family of 5?
What has been permitted is sufficient for the number of bedrooms in the home and the size of the family, according to the septic approval and well approval. One of the things that the applicant believes sort of hinders him and why he needs this setback variance is because of those dedicated areas. You can't build on them, you can't place a driveway on them, you can't site your home on top of them.
Sure.
That those dedicated areas are one of the reasons for the size of the manufactured home that he would like for his family of 5, and how he proposes to position it to minimize the variance request from the rear property line.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Chair recognizes James Fink.
Lynn, in the request, it says the request to vary from the required 20-foot rear setback in the residential RA. Down in number 3, it references the unified UDO requires a 35-foot front property setback when fronting a state-maintained road and 10-foot setback from side or rear. Is it, so we've got 20 up in the top and then we got 10 down in the body.
The side is 10. It's you said side or rear?
That's what it says, yeah.
I apologize, that's a typo on my part. That is not the case. The only time the setback is 10 feet, I thought I did really good with this packet too, jeez. The only time the setback on the rear would be 10 feet was if it were an accessory structure to a primary residential structure. The
Correct, and number 3 in the body, okay.
20 rear is correct, 10 side, and 35 front. Those are correct.
So that's the reason for the request, okay.
It was, and there was a part of that confusion that came up with this, and part of the confusion in the applicant's narrative is that when discussion of this case began, the new dimensional standards table had not gone into effect. So the property line at that time, the setback on the rear would have been 15 feet. But February 1st, the new standards table kicked in and the rear property line went up to 20 feet.
So old standards, he would be asking for 5 feet. New standards, he's now asking for 10.
Essentially, yeah. I'll let him clarify exactly how many feet it is before we make an order, so we'll know exactly how many feet it is.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair, I have a question.
Chair recognizes Julie Talbert.
No.
I'm sorry, Cindy Hayworth.
Lynn, it mentioned, the narrative, it mentions several existing structures, and I see in one of the photos there looks like a little storage barn.
I believe there is a storage unit. There previously had been a structure on the property that was abandoned and dilapidated that's being removed or has been removed in order to place the manufactured home out there. There may be one other small structure on there, but I will get Mr. Walls to testify exactly what those buildings are. He has reported that there are 2 there, and you can see one in the photographs, yes.
Yeah, well, I see 2. One looks like a storage building that's not in the best of shape, but then the other one is a doghouse. Is he counting that doghouse?
I wouldn't think so.
I think that's the well house.
It could be the well house,
There is
Or
a
is it?
10 by 20 garage already existing.
a garage. Thank you.
Right beside the driveway.
Yeah.
And then there is a 16 by 16 building existing on the top or the northern
brown thing, the well house?
No, it's a doghouse.
Not be considered a structure, so to speak, depending on the nature of it, but in most cases, no, it wouldn't be considered a structure.
So my next question would be, and maybe he would have to answer, is if we can see the existing structures, I don't know if this white building has already been torn down. One
I'll
was
let him
torn-
testify
Anyway,
as to what's happened.
How far these
Yeah.
are from where you've got this marked.
I've looked at the satellite imagery and the GIS, but I have not actually been out to the site, so I'll let Brandon describe that for you.
Okay.
And then will you bring up the site plan?
Yeah. I meant to leave it there. Thank you for reminding me. Here we go.
I think the gray boxes on there will answer your question about the two accessory structures.
One last question, Lynn.
Those are the existing structures as drawn on here by the applicant.
Lot requirement for a septic system in the county, 1 acre.
No, normally the minimum lot size in the RA district with well and septic would be 35,000 square feet. We just changed that because we had gone wholly to the density formulation, but that was proving not to be working well, remember, for minor subdivisions, and so we have the new minimum square foot. However, this is an existing lot of record. It's been there for quite some time. This is not a newly subdivided lot. If it was newly subdivided, we would say this is not workable because it's not buildable. But this has actually been subdivided out for quite some time, before any of our times, for sure.
All right, so the lot size for the septic system is grandfathered.
Essentially, yeah. It's a non-conforming lot, but it's a legal lot of record.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Oh, yes, thank you.
So where are these? If they're right here, then why?
Is the applicant here, Mr. Walls? All right, would you please stand up to the podium?
So he's out of that 35-foot.
And first, I want you to give us your name and address.
All right, my name is Brandon Walls. I live at 886 Fry Road in Stoneville, North Carolina.
Okay, this is a quasi-judicial hearing, which means you have to affirm your testimony. There's a Bible right there on the rail. If you'll put your left hand on there and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence and testimony you shall present to the Rockingham County Board of Adjustments on the matters at hand shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay. What is it you'd like the Board of Adjustment to know about your application for variance?
Well, like I said, or like Lynn said, that I'm trying to put a 3-bedroom house on the property for my family of 5. And with the new restrictions on the property, I'm unable to do so. I purchased this property in 2019 with the whole goal of putting a home there. And then with the new restrictions and the size of the home that I'm trying to purchase, I'm unable to do so. I've tried checking into other options, such as a smaller double wide, but either way I go, I will have to rather tear down one of the existing structures, or I just won't be able to build at all because of the restrictions for the well and the septic. What I have presented puts me only going over the setback for the rear of the property. Any other way that I tried to move it, I'd be cutting into the setbacks for the well, septic, or the front road frontage. So this is the only way that I'm able to put the house on the property without going into any other restrictions.
Okay, and and you want to vary the rear setback?
Yes, sir. That way I can keep the 35 foot on the front of the property for the roadway.
Brandon, can you tell us exactly how many feet, according to your site plan, the structure would be from the property line?
From the front of the property, front of the property line, it'll be exactly 35 foot.
How about the rear?
And then from the rear of the property, it's going to be, I believe, about 7 to 8 foot over the rear setback. So there'd
Over
be
the 15-foot setback?
15, correct.
Okay, so it would actually be 7 or 8 feet? It would actually be 13 feet because that setback changed.
Okay.
We haven't had a chance to talk that much about that, but that changed in February of this year, so that would be the number of feet we're considering.
And then that remains another 7 to 8 feet of my property line that I wouldn't be using for the structure.
Any questions for Mr. Wall?
I have one.
Chair recognizes Cindy Hayworth.
Mr. Wall, on this rendering, I think that you gave, how far is your proposed home to this building, this gray building right here?
It'll be roughly about 20 foot away from that.
Okay.
15 to 20 foot. I haven't measured it exactly, but
Okay.
Cindy, were you speaking about the gray building towards the bottom of the site plan on the southern edge? Okay. His well is down there, too.
Yeah.
Structures have to be 5 feet apart on any given property, residential property, but I believe the well setback is 25 feet around. That's not actually noted on there, but it's written up in the report.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Chair recognizes John Roberts.
Mr. Walls, I think it would be generous to say that the topography of that site is going to present you with some challenges in putting that structure on there. How do you plan to adequately support that structure?
I'm not sure I understand what your question is,
Well,
like, as far as how I'm putting.
The back of on the rear lot size, it's going to be right on ground level, but out toward the road, you're going to have it's going to be quite a ways up elevated there, and you're going to be able to support that whole structure sufficiently?
I believe so.
There are very strict rules for building code when it comes to manufactured homes as to how far they may be elevated to a certain point, and beyond that, what you have to do as far as tying down and masonry supports and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Walls? Thank you, sir. Any further discussion by the board?
Has there been any, well, no, they don't send out cards on this one, do they?
We notify adjoining parcel holders for variance and appeals requests, and we haven't had any phone calls.
Okay. I actually have a question for Mr. Walls. I'm sorry. Have you either spoken to or collaborated with the neighbor to the back? Because what that means, if we grant you this 13-foot variance, you're basically moving into the buffer between yourself and your neighbor. Have you spoken with them? I know it's a large piece of property, but has there been any feedback? How do they feel about it? Or
No, I have not spoken with them.
that was my only question. Thank you.
Any calls for or against?
0 phone calls.
None. 0 phone calls. Yeah.
What did he say?
Do we know, I can't see from here, do we know how large the property to the rear is, and is it occupied at all?
It is quite a few acres. It is a vacant lot. There's not a residential structure or anything like that on it, from what I recall when I was looking at my maps. It's zoned RA, but it's mostly forested land, as best I could see from our imagery. Would you agree with that, Brandon? Okay,
Address points, and it just looks like there's a clearing, and then the rest of it's forested.
right. Thank you, Marcy.
We appear to be missing the motion sheet for this case.
Oh, don't tell me I did that. I thought I was so proud. Motion sheet. If you would, turn to,
Well, there's no consistency statements. There's.
Really not,
The motion would
no.
just be a regular type motion regardless, so there's nothing to
Right.
statutorily require in the motion.
unlike a rezoning where we have the reasonableness and consistency, et cetera, that's not required for a variance.
You have to meet the 4 conditions. That needs to be in the motion.
Correct.
If it's okay with you, fellow board members, I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Okay.
I move that we approve the requested variance on the grounds that an unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance. It shall not be necessary to demonstrate that in the absence of the variance, no reasonable use can be made of the property. The hardship results from conditions that are peculiar to the property, such as location, size, or topography. The hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant or the property owner. And the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. Additionally, in granting the variance, the board determines that the extended area or that the variance will not extend an area or expand non-conforming use of the land, change the district boundaries shown in the zoning map, impair any adequate supply of light and air to adjacent property, materially increase the public danger of fire, materially diminish or impair established property values within the surrounding area, or in any other respect impair the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare.
I second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve this application for variance to the UDO. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like sign. There's no opposition, so the request for a variance is granted. Mr. Walls, you're good to go.
I'll send you a letter in the morning, Brandon.
Since this is the only case the Board of Adjustment had this evening, we're going to go ahead and adjourn the Board of Adjustment meeting and reconvene as the Planning Board. The Planning Board meeting is now in session. What we're going to be dealing with at the Planning Board is zoning changes. Zoning map changes reviewed by the Planning Board are legislative matters. These map changes are reviewed for reasonableness and consistency with North Carolina General Statute 160D, the county's 2021 Land Use Plan, and Unified Development Ordinance, among other adopted plans. When making a decision, we consider recommendations of the planning staff and public comments. When applicable, this board, reviews potential land uses requested by the applicant. Planning board decisions are forwarded to the Board of Commissioners as recommendations. The Board of Commissioners will hold a public meeting before making a final decision whether to approve or deny a zoning map change recommended by the Planning Board. The zoning map change is the first in a series of reviews and approvals that move a project forward. The Technical Review Committee reviews the site plans and technical items related but not limited to later development approvals, including transportation and concerns, environmental issues, and county services. The TRC is comprised of professional staff and other agency members, such as North Carolina Department of Transportation, county schools, emergency service, and North Carolina Division of Environmental Quality. Each case on the agenda requesting a zoning map change will be presented to the Planning Board by a member of the planning staff. Following the staff presentation, the case applicant will be given the opportunity to brief the board regarding the case. Following the applicant's presentation, the planning board will provide a public comment period for each case. All persons who would like to speak during the public comment period regarding any rezoning case being heard by the planning board must sign the case file roster located at the entrance of these chambers prior to the beginning of the meeting. The public comment period is not a forum for a dialogue or debate with the planning board. The express purpose of the public comment period is for the planning board to receive additional facts, comments, and opinions regarding a request to change the zoning map. After the public comment period, the applicant will be given the opportunity for rebuttal. All right, let's see. And with that, we're going to ask staff to present our first case, rezoning request 2023-03.
Thank you, members of the board, for moving forward. 2023-03. On my slides, that has an error. I apologize. It says 0.4. I'm just going to stop apologizing. The application was made by Mrs. Suzanne Knight, who owns the parcel. The tax pin indicates two parcels that are actually separated by a road, but have the same tax pin for taxation purposes. So it's technically two parcels according to, I guess, a planning viewpoint, but for taxation purposes, it's just one parcel. So that's why there's only one tax pin. And I'll make that a little clearer when we get to the map. This is a non-conditional rezoning request straight from RP to RA in the Huntsville Township. Here's the vicinity. It's pretty far west in the county in what I believe to be a fairly rural area. As you can see, about 15 acres. About 15 acres are currently zoned RP on each side of the road. But on the southern side, the majority of the parcel is zoned RA. There's some sparse RP zoning out here, but there's a lot more RA out here. And the basic request is to go from one to the other. But you can see how it's actually two parcels, but it's divided by the road. The environmental map just shows that it's got some creeks and bodies of water that would need to be protected and River Madison watershed. Land use plan map, it's in the O2 land class just on the verge of G1. So it's in the rural land class. Land areas in the rural land class are recommended to be zoned residential agricultural. This area, according to the land use plan, is characterized by low-density housing, agriculture, and open or forested lands. The uses that are allowed in the residential agricultural district are generally harmonious with those uses currently in place in the area. There's essentially primary residential and agricultural uses in the area and some open lands. The applicant has given me no indication of any specific use. And like I said, this is a straight rezoning. So she basically, as we discussed it, feels like the RA zoning class works best for her future needs versus RP.
Okay.
I'm glad to answer any questions.
Were there any calls regarding this?
I received one.
There were a total of 3 inquiries on this one, 1 in person, 2 phone calls.
Objections to it?
Nope, just general inquiries asking what's going on.
We also.
Any questions for Mr. Cochran? Thank you, Lynn. No one has signed up to speak for this case.
Mrs. Knight said she might not be able to make it tonight, but she plans on attending the board of commissioners hearing. She did tell me she has
Okay.
important engagement.
Speaking of the commissioners' meeting, when is the date that these rezonings will be heard by the commissioners?
One's being heard this evening, unless there is some sort of unexpected delay, will be heard Monday, April 17th.
April 17th? Okay, that's an important date, folks, because remember, what the planning board approves or denies at this meeting tonight merely serves as a recommendation to the commissioners. If you walk out of here with an approval, you have a recommendation that's approved. The final decision rests with the commissioners, and they'll hear the same case, and you all have the opportunity to be heard at their meeting on April 17th. Okay, any discussion on this case?
I'll make a motion.
Okay,
A motion to recommend approval of this request to rezone the specified parcel to the requested zoning district based on the consistency and reasonableness determination statements that are included in the board agenda packet submitted during the rezoning presentation, and as may be amended, incorporated into the motion to be included in the minutes.
motion has been made and seconded to approve this rezoning for case 2023-03. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Those opposed, like sign. On a vote of 5-1, the board will recommend to the county commissioners that this application be approved. And now we call on staff to present our next case, 2023-04. We're going to keep you hopping up and down tonight, Lynn.
I make up for it now. Our third request of the evening is case 2023-04, a request made by Mr. George Carter. It's a rezoning request to rezone a parcel that lies exactly on the US 220 corridor from highway commercial conditional district to highway commercial, basically removing the current conditional restrictions. The last occasion that it was rezoned specifically and only for industrial equipment sales and service, which is a practice that we really don't engage in much anymore, zoning for a specific use, because it does things like this. It makes land tricky later in the development scheme. Given where this is located, there's the vicinity map. That's the sort of close-in zoning map, and you can see there's quite a bit of highway commercial around there.
Oh, yeah.
Zoomed out, still quite a bit of highway commercial. This is my purple land use map. It just shows you that it's in the G3 land use class. That's all that is. Being in the G3 land use class makes it suitable for zoning for a mix of uses: housing, industrial, commercial, and water and sewer services are available here. This is characterized in the county's strategic growth area. This request will allow all uses in the highway commercial district. Those will essentially remain on par with uses in adjacent and surrounding tracts. I did checked the other commercial tracts in the area, and none of the other commercial tracts have any conditional uses placed on them. It was just this one specific parcel. Back in 2011, is that my date? 14, thank you. With that, I'm glad that staff's recommending approval. We feel like it's reasonable and consistent with the land use plan and the zoning metrics in the area.
Any questions for Mr. Cochran?
The applicant is present.
Okay. Yes, I have him on the sign-up sheet.
Inquire about calls for or against.
I had one. Did you have?
I think we had a grand total of 2,
Total.
and they were just inquiries that I saw, so no,
No, yay, this is great, or I don't like that idea. Neither of those.
no way to tell them about the attitude on the phone, whether they were in favor or not. It was just wanted to know why they got a card. I think that's largely also, real quick, because we sent them out 1,000 feet. Some people didn't realize this was on 220. So
Our radius for mailed notifications for rezonings and special use permits is 1,000 feet from the parcel that is determined by the tax map. For appeals and variances, it's only adjacent parcels, since those don't carry the sort of same issues as rezonings and special use permits do.
All right, thank you.
Questions?
Nope.
Okay.
Mr. George Carter, would you please come up to the podium? And for the record, would you please state your name and address?
George Carter. My address is 702 Wilkins Street, Mayodan, North Carolina.
Okay. This is not a quasi-judicial proceeding, so you won't be required to be sworn in. So what is it you'd like the planning board to know about your application?
I think Lynn covered it probably more eloquently than I can. We just want to free up the use from the condition of an industrial equipment sales to basically just highway commercial. The plan is to implement a self-storage facility beginning on the south side of the lot. With the nature of the heavy equipment truck dealership on the lot now, there's not much need for the highway frontage. The majority of the business is online. So it's acting essentially as an office and a holding lot, and we're looking to put that property to use.
Get some revenue flowing out of it, huh?
That's correct.
Do have one question for you. Give me a minute to pull up the map here. And let's see, this was, okay, so we're looking at roughly 1.5 acres. How many storage units do you anticipate you'll be able to put on the property?
Initially starting with 25 on the south side of the lot, probably later into 2024, looking at another 20 to 25.
Okay.
That's not all that the property will hold, but that's all that we're willing to take on at the moment.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, Chair recognizes Cindy Hayworth.
Did you speak with anyone, or has anyone approached you about this property, or have you spoken with any of the residential that's around this?
I have not. My father was the one. Him and my mother are the property owners. They got the conditional rezoning, and there were minimal concerns, I would say, the first time around. The property behind the lot, they have a significant amount of land. It's of no concern to them. But no, I haven't spoken with anyone or heard any complaints or support of it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Carter? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any discussion by the board?
I'd like to make a motion.
You have the floor.
I move to recommend approval of this request to rezone the specific parcel to the requested zoning district based upon the consistency and reasonableness determination statements that are included in the board agenda packet submitted during the rezoning presentation and as amended, incorporated into the motion to be included in the minutes.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the application to rezone property pursuant to the particulars in case number 2023-04. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like sign. No opposition. So the planning board, Mr. Carter, will make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners to approve this application. And as I said earlier, you're welcome to attend their meeting on the 17th.
They're going that way, so it should get a little quieter.
Sounded like a dog. A little yapper. I have one of those.
A little bit, it is.
Where was I? Yes, you can attend the meeting on the 17th, and if there's any opposition or anything like, you'll have an opportunity to speak. Okay. Moving right along, our next case, which we'll ask staff to present, is 2023-05.
With case 2023-05, some of the maps looked a little different. I just want to give a shout out to Miss Victoria for doing it her way. And that's why they look like they do. I think she did a great job. Request 05 is also for rezoning from residential protected to residential agricultural. The parcel is located on Odell Lane in the Leaksville Township. This is a non-conditional straight rezoning, just like all the others so far this evening. The area is the pink dot near the top of the map. It's pretty far north in the county, just outside of Eden. It is located in what at one time was platted as a major subdivision, but it's an oldie. It hasn't been a recent major subdivision, no new plats or additions. And many of these lots haven't been occupied. Some have. It was rezoned to residential protected, I believe, if I didn't make a note in my staff report, before the ordinance was even around. The land use plan here, it's in the G1 land class, green. And in G1, like O2, the land use plan recommends residential agricultural as the most dominant zoning district that there should be, along with in G1, limited neighborhood commercial at targeted nodes. This really isn't near any one of the targeted nodes. We have had a few phone calls on this one. I've talked to maybe, how many do you have marked down?
I think there's like 4
And I've
total.
had 2 on top, so we had about 6 phone calls. The 2 that I got, one was an inquiry and one was opposed. I think there were several people signed up to speak. But the applicant is here also. Excuse me. But with that, I'll be glad to, I'm checking one thing in my staff report, but as I do that, I'll be glad to answer any questions. We're recommending approval. It abuts a large parcel zoned residential agricultural, and since it's in the G1 land class, the land class recommendations of the land use plan support it. The size of the parcel is typical for the area. It's not particularly small or particularly large, and it is suitable for development. So when it's looked at objectively according to the guidelines and the ordinance, we feel like we can recommend approval.
Statement on the phone calls, the few that I got were all just inquiries, wanting to know what was going to happen with the property. I didn't have a yes or a no in my several phone calls. Did you, Vic? No. Yeah.
Any questions for Mr. Cochran? Chair recognizes John Roberts.
Lynn, is there a representative from Clayton Homes here?
Yes, the applicant is from Clayton Homes. He's here, and he's willing to speak with you.
He is the applicant.
He is the applicant acting on behalf of the owner. Anytime we have a rezoning application, the owner must sign as a sort of co-applicant and must verify, yes, I know this is happening, yes, that I request this and agree to it and feel this is in my best interest. So that's part of what you see in the application package.
Property owner.
We'll get to that on the sign.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, who, is there a, does Clayton Homes, are they able to offer us a picture of what this property is going to look like?
We'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
I would also caution that
Sorry, go ahead.
the idea of a picture about what this will look like, since this is a straight rezoning, wouldn't be something that should be taken into consideration. When you're talking about a straight rezoning, you have to consider all the zoning permitted uses in RP and all of the uses in RA. And is it suitable for what? Unlike a conditional rezoning, where we had specified conditions that the applicant had either asked for or agreed to. In a situation like that, a site plan, pictures, things like that would certainly be appropriate. But given since it's a non-conditional rezoning, that really shouldn't really have any bearing on it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one question for staff.
Nice, James Fink.
Maybe one of you guys can speak to this. It seems like we've had a couple of cases up this way. I know we've had one on Michelle Lane before. Can you tell us the history of some of the outcomes of our prior cases?
The one on Michelle Lane was approved in 2021 early for a manufactured house. I don't think they've gotten their project approved. They haven't yet put the home on there. But as far as we've been able to determine our research, as far as approvals go, that was the only one in that subdivision that was approved for any type of manufactured housing that we've been able to pull out in GIS. There's been several in the vicinity around this subdivision, but actually within the subdivision, that's the only one we've been able to determine.
We didn't have one on Brenda Court early last year? I'm just going from memory.
That sounds familiar, but that might have been, was that Carrie maybe?
It's been a little bit ago.
I don't think we've done one since I've been here.
I can say
That's in a
with,
neighborhood and near where I work, so that's why, I know folks that live on some of these roads, that's why I ask.
nearby, there are manufactured homes.
Right.
Specifically within the central segment
There is.
of this major subdivision. I believe the homes that are there are primarily site-built or modulars, one or the other. Yeah.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Cochran? Thank you, Lynn.
I'll go back to,
Is the representative from Clayton Homes here?
Yes.
Would you please approach the podium, sir?
Tighter.
And for the record, please state your name and address.
My name's Trent Prater. My address is 8434 Cripplegate Trace, Brown Summit, North Carolina.
Okay, and you're acting for the applicant?
I'm the applicant, turned it in. The homeowners are here.
Okay.
If you guys did want to speak to them.
Speaking on their behalf is what I'm trying to get
Yes.
to. Okay, fine. What is it that you would like us to know about this case?
We proposed to put a manufactured home on there. It's approved for, we've got their loans approved for a 3-bedroom, double wide. The land right now is zoned for modulars, but it just would not fit in the budget. So we're trying to get them into a house and get the family into a home. And we're able to do that with a manufactured home.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Prater?
Yes.
Keep-
Mr. Prater, is there, why this lot?
They already own the land.
So they own this lot?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's my question. Need to ask them.
a comment that I've made quite a few times, you guys have heard me, even though some specific uses are being discussed and planned, and we clearly know what those are, do keep in mind what I just mentioned, that this is a straight rezoning. All uses in RP versus all uses in RA. Is it suitable?
Okay, thank you, sir. You'll have an opportunity for rebuttal after we hear from some speakers who have signed up for this case.
Okay.
Harry? Please come forward. State your name and address, please.
Joseph Terry, 15074 NC Highway 87 North, Eden. So I'm actually right at the corner of Shannon and 87. My purpose here today, sir, I returned from a trip from work yesterday and found this in my mailbox. So it's more or less for...
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, it's more or less for inquiry purposes. I just did move here about a month ago. So I purchased the house at that piece of land very, very recently. More or less, I was just kind of concerned of like what RP versus RA concerns, what things happen to the property values, but I've kind of been hearing some talking, and it sounds like there's really no major issues that anyone should really be concerned about. So that's really my purpose here, sir.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Terry?
I'm just interested in where his property is in reference to this. Lynn, can you put that map back up? Maybe you can show us.
Might need to zoom out a little bit on this map. Let me see if I can get,
Your land use map has a, there you go.
there we go.
Yep, I am the very funky shaped L shape at the top, but where 87 and Shannon Lane intersect. So,
It's the L that's got a bigger top than a bottom.
yeah, very, very weirdly shaped. So,
He's right there.
Thank you, sir. Tanya Smith?
Hello,
Please state your name and address.
Tanya Smith. My address is Wimbish Road in Eden. My daughter's address is 168 Odell Lane in Eden.
And what is it that you'd like the planning board to know?
Her property is right beside where they want to put the mobile home. All the houses out there, I'm the mail carrier for that whole area for the last 20-some years. All the houses out there are stick-built, and all the people that live in them own them. There's no rental houses or anything, so she's just worried that her property value will go down if there's a mobile home put there. You know, she's got a lot invested in her house.
Any questions for Ms. Smith? Okay, thank you. State your name and address.
Heather Crawford, 168 Odell Lane. My property is the one to the right of the one that they are wanting to put the mobile home on. I've been there since 2009. All of the housing, it's been restricted, residential restricted since I bought the land my property, and that's the reason I bought that property, or one of the reasons I did. And then, like my mom said, everyone in that development has been there for a very long period of time. My most recent neighbors that I have is the ones next to me, that they're the newest neighbors that I have and have been there for 2 years. But that's my concern, is also if I have a mobile home beside me, my property value goes down.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Crawford? Thank you. Scott Dawson?
Yeah, I live at 229 Odell Lane, and I own the property right across from the property that's in question. It kind of drew our attention when they just went in and just started clearing the property. We were concerned about what was going to go in there at the time, and then the hearing, of course, the hearing came up. But we're all concerned about property values. I've been down there 25-plus years, and every house is stick-built, and there's no, like I said, there's no rental properties or anything. Everybody's concerned about the property values.
Has anyone talked to an appraiser?
No, not that I know of.
I have a question for him.
Chair recognizes Cindy Crawford.
So Mr. Dawson, thank you for that.
Oh, do you realize you just called
Sure.
Cindy Crawford?
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you for that.
It's a compliment.
That's why I said thank you.
Oh,
It's a Monday.
The property that is across from you, have a large lot.
There's a large lot across.
Is that yours?
Yeah, over an
Okay.
acre, yeah.
Okay. So was this a heavily wooded lot before it was cleared?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
And they went in and cleared just about all the
Completely
trees
clear?
off of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and, you know, when I moved down there was restrictions on stick-built or manufactured houses. I don't know how if there's restrictions still.
You mean restrictive covenants that went with the lot?
Yeah, that were with the subdivision.
If I may, part of what I remembered from a prior case was that when the plot was originally sold and subdivided, there was a statute of limitations or a time frame that had ran out. So we've already passed that point, if I remember right.
That is typical with a lot of older subdivisions. If it's
Right.
not kept up by an HOA, that their restrictive covenants may lapse. It may be written that way. We, as a government, don't enforce restrictive covenants, so we're not allowed to utilize those in our determinations. So we didn't check into their particular property's deed for the restrictive covenants. Again, because we can't enforce them or legally, we're not allowed to enforce them, so we don't check on it.
Yeah, because I'm one of the original ones that have lived down there. I mean, all the newer houses were built since I've lived there.
Okay, thank you.
We had a case last year where restrictive covenant for modular or manufactured housings were prohibited. And after an investigation by an attorney, they were found to have expired several years ago.
Yep.
So even if we could enforce them, they've expired. Any questions for Mr. Dawson? Ms. Crawford, do you have anything? I'm sorry about that.
No, that's a compliment, thank you.
I guess we're through. Thank you very much. Mr. Prater, you have a chance now for rebuttal. The public comment period is closed, so you've heard the concerns of some people, and now's your chance to address them.
And we have looked at the houses around there. This particular one, being a double wide, it's not an inexpensive house. They're spending, not including the land, they're looking at around $160,000 for the house and the construction to put it all together. So it's not a rental property. They're going to be their family's home, and they've worked hard to be able to afford it, and we really want to be able to put them in one. This is the only way that we can do it on their parcel. So we really hope you guys can. I've got some pictures of the house. If they're the renderings of them. If you guys do want to look at them, I can give those to you.
I can take these up for you to take a look at, but
Can we ask additional questions?
Yes, Chair recognizes Julie Tauber.
Can you tell me how long the couple has owned this lot?
They said August of last year.
So less than, well, about 6 months.
Any other questions for Mr. Prater?
Just one. I mean,
Yes.
I guess my biggest question is that when you look at the subdivision, if you come down Shannon Lane and go right, if you come down Shannon Lane and go straight on the Brenda Court or make the left down Odell, every single property on that subdivision is residentially protected, and you're asking us to single out one and move it to RA. The only other RA in that whole box that we see is to due south and then outside to the west of the subdivision. I suspect that if you even broaden out this map, that you're going to see a lot more RA in there. I just don't understand. I mean, I understand why he's asking for it, obviously, but I mean, you've heard the comments from a lot of the folks that live nearby. They have some concerns and they seem valid. I mean, you're asking us to single out one piece of property when there's probably a good 40 or 50 in that subdivision that's already residentially protected?
Like I said, this one's not going to be a rental. I mean, it's not a single wide that we're putting in there, or, a really an inexpensive home. I mean, this is, truly a really nice double wide. We would like to put the modular in, but it just would not fit in their budget. So we really want to try to be able to put them in the house on their land that they already bought.
Thank you.
Another question. When they purchased the property, was Clayton involved in that?
No.
Okay, so they just bought it on their own?
Yes.
Just saw a lot and bought it? Okay.
Yes.
I just have one. Mr. Prater, I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard neighbors when you're building or taking in something like this, questioning the value of property. And I know that you can't foresee or predict that, but does Clayton Homes have any studies or statistics that you can present to not only the neighbors, but to boards like us that are making these decisions? Do you have any statistics? Because I would feel sure that this isn't the first time you've heard that.
Besides, appraisals in the area, that's usually what we go off of.
I mean, statistics that when these homes are placed with stick-built or like homes, that you have no statistics that prove up or down that it, okay.
No,
I was just wondering. Okay, thank you.
Nothing further? All right, thank you, sir. As we begin our discussion, I'd like to say that affordable housing is a real hot-button issue, not only in the state of North Carolina right now, but all over the United States. And there's a group of housing types in the theater of affordability that's called the missing middle. And it makes it very difficult for people to find housing for their families, because you either have what amounts to slums, and then you have the high end, the $350,000 plus houses, and no one seems to be filling the category in between. That presents a real hardship on a person when you tell them that you have a nice piece of land, but you can't use it. And to deny someone an opportunity to provide for their family with such an essential, and a lot of people would argue a human right, to have a house to live in, some kind of quarters, a roof over your head that you can afford and not go broke doing it. Not everyone can afford to live in a development like Colebrook or a lot of the other new developments along 220 where the houses are, $250,000 and up. It's not everyone's prerogative to do that. Last year in this general area, on those grounds, we approved a rezoning from residential protected to residential agricultural for that specific person, so that a family could build their home, a place to live. And my own personal opinion is, absent an appraiser coming in and saying, well, this is going to dramatically affect the housing values of all the adjoining properties in the area, frankly, I don't see a legitimate reason to deny this request. And board members, I'll leave it up to you to carry on the discussion.
I'm really torn with this one because on the one hand, you're correct. Affordable housing is a real crisis right now, particularly in our community because there's no inventory. But I also the fact that it appears, now we've done spot zoning, now, you know, but this one, I'm not real sure. They've owned the piece of property for 6 months. And you know, we don't have any history of how they came upon or how they came to find this piece. But I think it's a disservice to them for some realtor or somebody to have told them somewhere along the line that, oh, just go ahead and buy it, we'll get it rezoned, when everything around this is RP. And we've had this discussion about this subdivision. Granted, it's a strange one because there's, you know, there was an intent to this subdivision from the beginning. And it was not for manufactured housing of any kind. But at the same time, there's a corner of this that butts up to a mobile home park. So it's a real dilemma. It's a dilemma. Oh, that was clear as mud, wasn't it?
Pile on with what Julie said. Just going back and remembering the case that we had in this area once before, that same issue came up. And I think when going through with what you mentioned, Chairman Paul, that when they finally got the legal part of it all settled out, the intent was pretty clear, at least in my mind, that this subdivision was made for what it's zoned for. And to go outside that, I mean, I agree with both of you all. I understand that, you know, what they're trying to do, what the intent is, but to me, it just doesn't fit in this particular development.
I agree that it is a dilemma, and what everything that everyone has said is true. But in fact, asked Julia, I said, you know, is this spot zoning? Because I know that we've talked about this before. I think there's a clear demarcation of the property adjoining this that is not the same zoning. But I agree with what my fellow board members said, that I think that this particular part was meant to be the type housing that it is. And I really feel bad if you were misrepresented by a realtor or whoever you bought the land from that promised you something that they couldn't make happen. So I think I'll have to vote against this.
Any other comments? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion.
Chair recognizes James Fink.
Keeping with my previous comments, I just want to make sure everybody understands just the reason I'm making the motion I'm making is just it doesn't fit with the intent with this subdivision. So therefore, I make a motion to recommend denial of this request to rezone the specific parcels to the requested zoning district contrary to the consistency and reasonableness determination statements that are included in the board agenda packet submitted during the rezoning presentation as may be amended, incorporated into the motion to be included in the minutes.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to deny this application for rezoning. All those in favor of that motion, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like sign. On a vote of 4-2, the motion carries and the zoning application is denied. Now, Mr. Prater, you, of course, again, like the previous applicant, you have the opportunity to approach the Board of Commissioners at their meeting on April 17th to argue your case.
That's a hard one.
Yes, it is.
Our next case is a text amendment to the UDO, case number 2023-07. And if staff would be kind enough to fill us in on the particulars.
This is actually a text amendment that has been written by a citizen, the pastor of Floyd Baptist Church. There is a church on a medium-sized parcel, and they would like to have a small religious school associated with it. Schools of any kind are not allowed in the RP district, whether it's public institution, private, religious. It's just not allowed in the RP district. Right now, schools are allowed in the OI district, office and institutional. They're allowed in the RA district with a special use permit. I think they may also be in the HC zone. There's one other zone that they're allowed in with developmental standards. So the applicant has requested that the board consider the idea of allowing a religious school in the residential protected district, specifically when it is located on the same parcel as the primary place of worship to which it's associated. Staff looked at this, reviewed it, and we feel like it's a reasonable request. We don't see why there would be much of an impediment if this was made a permitted use. The actual text is here on the slide in front of you. I tried to get it as large as I could, but this would be subject to a special use permit. So the board would have to also take the step to approve a special use permit should this be allowed as a use. Basically with the same design standards as the RA district. These are the same things. And these standards that are shown here are the same whether they're a special use permit or whether they're an administrative developmental standards permit in a district other than residential. The ones where it's D, I believe that's rural, commercial, and office institutional, I think. Those have developmental standards, but those developmental standards are just these. Now, making it a special use permit process also means that the board can request or allow other sorts of conditions or approvals, that sort of thing. So we felt like it would be fair, since to have a school in the RA district, you would need a special use permit. It would be fair to require the same thing in an RP district. But this specifically is only for a religious school associated with the place of worship located on the same parcel as the place of worship.
And if I can add real quick, what needs to be added to these 62.79 is a F stating that if this is approved, that RP is for religious institutions only in the developmental requirements.
Yeah, that's a good point. That makes sense.
Repeat that one more time.
If y'all do want to proceed with recommending this, we also need to add in F under this, under section 62.79 that's on the screen right now, that stipulates that the RP allowance condition has to be a religious institution, because that's actually, if you look at the applicant's request, that's what they are requesting, is that this be religious institution only.
That would make sense, yeah. Keep in mind that if a religious organization of any type owns a parcel of land, but there is no primary place of worship, it wouldn't allow the school for religious purposes or otherwise. Marge is making a good distinction, though, that to make sure there's no confusion about what the special use permit standards would be, we could add for the special use permit in the RP district, it can only be a religious school associated with the place of worship where it's going to be co-located.
Okay, so all we're asking for here is a new use in the permitted table and not a rezoning.
No rezoning, just a new use in the...
I don't want to get tangled up in all kinds of precedent here that...
At this point, this is just text amendment. It's adding the use to the
Just a text
table.
amendment.
And then their specific request from their application was that add for the RP district in a religious school in a place of worship. So...
And the applicant is here, by the way.
That's what would need to be added into this body text.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, James Fink.
Lynn, do you know if DPI or Department of Community Colleges is there a minimum lot sizes attached to this? that you're aware of?
No, as far as we know, they don't. Essentially what it mentions DPI and Department of Community Colleges, but essentially what follows that, the structure, circulation, and parking, is what is included in those regulations. It's a little It's clumsily worded because that's what these recommendations are. There may be some other specifics, but those are the main ones that were pulled out from the Community College and Public Schools plan. And again, this won't be a public institution, so you got to think about that too.
We're going
a
to go
little bit.
through TRC and all the other fun
Depending
things
on the
too.
scope, yeah, it would.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on the scope, certainly.
If it goes in an existing building, there wouldn't be not much need to go to TRC, but they'd still have to go through y'all for the special use permit, at which point we would still need to see site plans and everything to make sure there's proper circulation and things like that.
Well, my understanding is DPI has some requirements too. Maybe the applicant is aware of that.
Yeah, and he can probably address those two. I'm sorry, yes.
It's not a major concern at this
Address
point,
those
so.
At this point, no. Speaking about TRC, yes, if it were, a special use permit were granted and there were especially specific additional standards added to the permit and it was building something from the ground up, it very may well warrant a TRC review. If it's an existing structure that they want to convert and there's going to be minimal sort of building footprint change or no building footprint change,
Would have already met it.
then the special use permit
Okay.
basically takes care of it
That
at
makes
that
sense.
point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Corey, do you have anything you want to add?
I don't guess necessarily unless there's any questions that.
Okay. I need to ask you to state your name and address for the record.
Corey Ingebretson, and my address is 280 Fulp Sawmill Road, Stoneville, North Carolina.
Okay. The school, size?
We're going to start out on this side of the property, which is the property that we're asking for. Change from, to have the clause put in there would be 25 students inside of the building. And we have a parcel of land that is right across the street as well, that is almost 18 acres, where we are looking to, in the future, actually this year, by the end of this year, hoping to get one building stationed over there, which is in an RA district, which we only have to go through a special permit to be able to get that approved for that. And then also we'll be going into a second building program in the middle of our field on the RA district to be able to house the school, gym, all that stuff as well in the future. And so we're wanting to get the school kicked off on this side of the road with the existing buildings that we have. And so we're looking the first year in August of '24 is when we're looking to kick the school off. And that first year we'll have 25 kids.
Good. Any questions?
Just one.
Yep.
What church would this be affiliated with?
Floyd Missionary Baptist Church.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you much.
Any discussion? I think if we go ahead and add the provision as item F in section 62.79, pursuant to Marzi's suggestion, we ought to be fine with doing this.
Make a motion to approve.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve a text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like sign. There's no oppositions. You got it.
Still have to go before the Board of Commissioners next month. Right.
I'm sorry. Who was the second? Was
he at? I was like, where are you doing this at?
Jeff second or did?
We're good.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have a good evening. Were you the second?
Yes.
Okay, I just couldn't.
Yes.
Quite
I
hear.
didn't say it loud.
It's okay.
My bad.
That's why we asked.
Turn the
them.
page.
Very good.
And now for the fun part of this meeting.
Yeah, and I'll handle this one a little differently, since these are all staff-initiated text amendments. I'm going to pull out my separate sheets. Okay.
Barring any typos, there shouldn't be any problem with these.
Do we need to go through them all? But you can do one motion for the whole thing like we did the last time. Remember last time we did a block of them? We went through each of them, but you did a group motion.
We've got these structures, and all be considered individually. edited, changed or whatever, but in the end, the vote will be for all of them if they have changes or don't have changes.
Okay, you don't want to do them individually?
I will discuss them,
Okay.
but I didn't present extensive slides.
Speaking of individualizing and voting, I'm a member of the North Carolina Bar Association, and I attend a lot of these webinars, especially for case updates. And a recent case in Albemarle, North Carolina, highlighted a procedure that their planning board and board of adjustment go through when we have the 4 conditions that must be met for granting a variance. They vote on each one. Each one is presented as a separate case.
When I was in Whiteville, they didn't vote on, there wasn't a separate case each, but they did make a vote on each of the separate things each time, so that then the findings of facts would have individual votes for each of those sections, but not as separate cases. That would be a nightmare.
And I thought, and we think our meetings are cumbersome. Good
That'd be a nightmare.
I'm glad we're not doing that.
Well, I'm gonna settle in here and
bit
kick
much.
back and you roll on.
Moving right along, Mr. Cochran, tell us about TA 2023-01B.
01
We didn't relabel the originals.
B. So originally, the plan was the church school TA was going to be A, but we put it as an individual case since it was citizen asked, but now we go B through the rest of them. So B is pretty much a comprehensive review and update to the manufactured housing standards that apply to homes placed on individual lots in the county on parcels that are zoned for them to be placed in.
And real quick, I'm going to interrupt Lynn. I know we've been dealing with RP to RA for manufactured houses. That's not included in this part. This is criteria and standards and feasibility stuff, but to tackle that takes a little bit more research and a lot more community input.
Yeah, we're all on the same page with that one, I think. It's from a staff viewpoint. A couple of the main things that this does, it clarifies the definitions of what is what. What is a Class AA? What is a Class A? What is a Class B? What is a Class C? A Class A is essentially a newer type single-wide. We do not have a year number basis. That's not allowed. It's illegal, actually, to say no homes older than 2010. We can't do that. It's all based on appearance criteria. In the appearance criteria for single-wide manufactured homes, for a long time, this statute dates back to the 90s as part of the ordinance, and it was quite defensive in a current reading of it, and kind of places a pretty high burden on the person who might be only able to afford a single-wide family home. And we're not talking about rezoning. We're talking about they have some land or they're going to rent the land from someone else and the mobile home is allowed, and so they could set it up. This gets rid of some of the more cumbersome language that was, number one, written for materials that half of them aren't around anymore. It simplifies the materials that can be used for underskirting specifically, and it pretty much allows all the things it always has: a masonry curtain wall, a decorative concrete curtain wall, masonry board. But it also allows any other product that is specifically manufactured for use as manufactured home underskirting, other than standard untreated vinyl. And we kind of pull that untreated vinyl out because that helps the appearance of a single-wide family home blend a little more in neighborhoods where there might be a mix of single-family residential, modulars, and manufacturing. But we don't want to make it so burdensome that, especially now that housing prices are through the roof, like we were just discussing, we wanted to simplify it. Number one, simplify it, plus also take some of the burden off of the owner of the manufactured home. The rest of the language is updates, and it's adding back in. The previous UDO had a requirement for decks for single-wides on entries, and somehow when the new UDO, it got dropped. It just didn't make it into the new UDO. steps and decks. It's C4G on page 2 of this one. It essentially follows building code. A manufactured home, the front door, especially if it opens outward, must have a minimum 3x3 landing or small deck. Rears, if they open inward, they don't require that. They can just have stairs and open inward, but if they open outward, they must have a deck. This just takes the building standard and makes it a zoning standard also. It also clarifies the roof pitch and construction for both single wides and manufactured homes. It basically means a Class A or a Class AA home, which is a double wide, must have either a shingled roof or a standing seam metal roof, not the old-fashioned manufactured home type of metal roof. Standing seam metal is like the expensive kind of metal roof that you see more often now on single-family residences. And clarifying what we mean by, cement board, concrete board, fiberboard, we're just calling it masonry board, and it has to be suitable for outdoor construction. So if it's masonry board and suitable for outdoor construction, it can be used for siding on the home. It can be used for single wides, for underskirting. On double wides, we are keeping the requirement that double wides must go onto a masonry foundation or curtain wall. We don't want to go any further than that because that is another thing that helps double wides fit more in some neighborhoods than others. It gives them more of an appearance of a single-family residence. And one change we're making to that, this next to last section here in this one where it says all double-wide and multi-section manufactured homes which are placed in the MHD, blah, blah, that actually has to do with mobile home parks. It's redundant. It's not part of this. We're talking about mobile homes on individual lots. There is currently a requirement for double-wide manufactured homes to have a 36 square feet deck at the front entrance. We've had some concerns about that lately from applicants and from owners that starts to get pricey. And we thought about, is that really necessary? What else would look nice and be suitable? So we sort of agreed to a 24 square foot deck to sort of bring down the cost burden a bit, but still have a requirement to have a nice landing. That's only on the front. The rear can have either straight entry or another type of deck landing on the back if you'd like. Those are the main points in manufactured home parks. Yes.
If you go all the way back to the first page here, in A, it says Class C manufactured homes are not permitted. What is a Class C?
I should have added these. They're in the definitions at the very beginning of the UDO, what a Class A, B, C, and AA are. So a Class C is a manufactured home built prior to July 1, 1976, because building code and electrical and other standards changed significantly, and they're just not considered safe. If they exist somewhere and are still in use, that's great, but they can't come into Rockingham County.
You can't move it, or
Nope.
it's where it is.
You have to stay where it is, and a new one can't be, one of that type cannot be moved in.
The electrical code changed that year, and HUD updated their standards to that point at the same time, so you can't move it, you can't slide it from one property here to another property here, it can't come from out of county, can't even stay within county and be moved. It's just not safe to be habitated. 1976. July 1, 1976 and earlier.
Those are just simply not allowed. Class B is based more so on appearance. And even though that's a year, let's see, to make Class C, even though that designates a specific date and year, it's not because of the age of the home, it's because of how much the code changed. Class Bs are essentially those that cannot meet the appearance criteria for Class A manufactured homes, which includes a shingled roof or a standing seam roof, siding that you would see typically on a single-family residence, the higher level of underskirting. If you can't meet those requirements, that's a Class B. Those are allowed in manufactured home parks, but not on individual lots. Because they can have, in parks, they can have standard vinyl skirting and that sort of thing. That might be a manufactured home for example, built in the late 90s but still had a metal roof and it wasn't shingled and it wasn't a standing seam, that wouldn't be allowed on an individual lot.
But a Class B could be moved within the county.
Class B can be moved, but only to a mobile home park.
Only mobile home park to mobile home park.
Right, or from out of county into a mobile home park. It can be brought in from out of county, but the only place it can go is a manufactured home park. You can't set it up on an individual lot. And then the Class A criteria are those that are spelled out here, which makes them Class A. And Class AA is double wide. Different zoning jurisdictions use different letters for how they classify their manufactured homes. This is kind of always the way they've been classified in Rockingham County, so we just left it that way. But yeah, that's essentially what we're going for. It needs to be updated. There's been a lot of back and forth. Some materials that are listed in here or that may have been approved in the past are no longer even on the market or are not really suited for that purpose, and we're trying to streamline it, take some of the burden off as far as costs go for people whom this is their primary choice of residence, but also keep a nice standard for appearance criteria.
The Class A would be one with the underpinning, that would be the brick.
Class A would be able to have anything that is approved and is manufactured for specifically the purpose of underskirting, except for untreated vinyl. For example, there are products out there called skirting board, specifically for manufactured homes. They're a masonry board, fiber cement board. That would be suitable. A reinforced UV-resistant, weather-resistant type of faux stone or faux brick would be fine if attached to a frame made from pressure-treated wood or construction-grade metal. Masonry curtain wall or masonry foundation, that would be fine. All of those things would be suitable for a Class A. And the other items that make a Class A are essentially the siding type, window placement, and the roofs.
On my single wide.
Sculpted marble
On my single wide.
Around.
with Roman soldiers driving chariots sculpted into it.
Home like that, so that's where
There's
he's
Corinthian
Class A.
columns.
So he
yes.
set it up
Over every door, yeah.
with the skirting wall, with the masonry style wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And the double wide is essentially, the same criteria as the single wide: roof construction and pitch, appearance of siding, window placement, but it does have to go onto a masonry foundation or curtain wall. These other products won't work for that for a double wide. But if there's something you guys think's missing or we need to add, let me know. We'll mark it up.
Yeah, no spots on it.
Let me
Looks
know.
good to me.
Dan, we want to add no spot zoning, those are, no, I'm just kidding.
You didn't, in the skirting materials, you didn't mention sculpted marble.
Oh, yeah, if you want to, go for it. I would advise against it because it's going to etch and stain in the road. I'd say, get you some quartzite or something like that. But, so that's that one. If we would like to, we can move on. Number 2, C, is clarifications and updates to the landscape buffers and screening ordinance. Some things just were not that clear when this was initially written out. So there are a few things that we're adding, but we're not adding a burden. We're actually taking some burden off. We're just basically saying that buffers and screening must be installed and maintained as depicted on their detailed site plan, which is a requirement for anything commercial, industrial, institutional. They must have a detailed site plan that is essentially a surveyor or drafter or engineer grade site plan drawn to scale for any of this, that also shows the landscape buffers and where they're going to go. We're just adding the one sentence about don't plant any species that are invasive and on this list. And the
Speaking
reason,
of that,
Yeah.
has the county taken a stand on prohibiting Bradford pears?
No, not specifically. The reason I wrote this the way I did, the North Carolina Invasive Plants Council or North Carolina Cooperative Extension, because they are the ones who maintain the list of what's actually invasive, and it gets updated routinely, but so that way we don't have to go back through and update the ordinance all the time. If something lands on the invasive species list, then it won't be allowed to be planted. And most of the folks who are doing larger scale commercial grade, industrial grade, office institutional stuff, they've got good landscapers who know. Landscape buffers are one of my things. I look at it, and I'm really particular about it to make sure that they're appropriate, especially when you're going to be butting up against a residential property. That's one thing we are changing. Let's see. We are changing if let's say an institutional parcel butts up against institutional, or highway commercial butts up against industrial, there's a 0 lot line setback. So when that sort of situation happens, a landscape buffer would not be required. A fence might be for one reason or another, but that would be a conditional approval. But where there's definitely where there's a disparate use, you've got highway commercial, like the one we talked about earlier today, and then you've got RA, and you've got a house, 100 feet from there. Yeah, you have to have the dense, opaque, vegetated landscape buffer. This basically gives the foundation for what the landscape buffer shall include, and we specifically left it that way so that it gives developers choice to what might be most suitable for theirs, and flexibility, as opposed to getting really into the weeds and detail. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to throw that pun out there, but getting really into the weeds about what tree can be planted and what may not be planted, and what's encouraged and what's not encouraged. I did clarify some of the standard language, and this is standard landscape language when we're talking about evergreen, canopy trees, ornamental understory trees, and shrubs. That's just very standard landscape language that refers to large classes of plantings that can be mixed in to a certain degree based on the type of screen that we're talking about here. We also have the option of pushing up a berm and adding a more slender vegetated buffer to that. I clarified some of that so that there are fewer questions about it. And also adding a paragraph that is very common in many other ordinances but had not been in our ordinance, where if there is an unavoidable delay in installation, let's say that a manufacturing building would otherwise be getting its certificate of occupancy issued, except for the fact that it's January and there's, well, not that this happens much anymore, and there's 12 inches of snow on the ground, not necessarily the time that you want to put in your landscape buffer. So in a situation like that, the community development director or his designee can allow up to 6 months after the CO has been issued to get the landscape installed. Now, some ordinances are quite stricter than ours. They allow this, but they also make them post a letter of credit or a bond. We didn't feel like that was necessary, but because it still has to happen. You still have to get it in there, and it still has to be approved by the community development director. Some of this is formatting corrections, where you see the outline numbers that are red. It was just messy. And we cleaned it up. And we are leaving in, in lieu of the buffer and script requirements that are here, community director, development director, or designated staff can review a landscape plan with someone, and if it provides a sufficient barrier for the use and what it's butting up against, we can approve an alternate landscape plan.
Bless you.
Thank you.
When you have that delay, who enforces that? Who goes back and looks at it again? Or is it flagged in the system that it's?
We would
still-
flag it, and if they had not installed it, we'll talk to them, and if they refuse to install it, we send code enforcement.
Yep. And that becomes a code enforcement case.
And they blow up the building.
That's right.
One of them, they might want to.
Second ball. Anything jump out at anyone, or anything you'd like to add, or? Thank you guys for working through this. This is kind of tedious.
Keep in mind, sorry, real quick, keep in mind the landscaping stuff is really just for commercial development.
Only commercial and
This wouldn't impact
multifamily
residential or subdivisions.
Right. Doesn't affect major subdivisions, doesn't affect single-family housing. It would apply for a true multifamily type housing situation. That's not townhomes. We're talking stacked apartments.
And campgrounds.
These do apply to campgrounds. We've been enforcing that more so. We've got our campground permit. We've got it rocking. It's moving right. And we're making people do stuff. So since we tightened the standards on those a bit, they've got to have their landscape buffers. It says in the campground permit that they are subject to the developmental criteria found in Division 5, which basically has to do with commercial and industrial and institutional development. So if you think that's okay, we'll move on to subdivision procedures. This mostly needed clarification, and it was one thing that we added. We made say, we added State Department of Transportation where it belongs. We're deleting this last bit of text on page 2, number 4, about all county standard roads, because those were taken out of the ordinance. We have state roads or private roads. There are no county standard roads. We put that in there as an option for a while, but no one used it, and it just seemed a waste of space and time. One of the significant things that would be changing is that a major subdivision of 12 lots or less that does not require a new right-of-way or other improvement like water and sewer, if it only requires septic and well evaluation, 12 lots or less, the TRC visit can be waived at the discretion of the county development director. If there is, one thing that warrants TRC review, it's going to TRC review. But if it's 12 lots or less, and anything over 12 is going to TRC, period. But if it's 12 lots or less, we've recently had several major subdivisions come in that were 8 lots or 6 lots or maybe 10 lots. And really those don't need, if they all have frontage and don't need new roadways, if they don't need water and sewer and all they need is well and septic, it uses up valuable time that really isn't necessary.
It seems like it's an inconvenience to a lot of people to have the TRC meet just for that.
Right. When given the standards that we have, staff is perfectly capable of making a determination on that.
Do you see a problem with item B? Technical Review Committee shall conduct an initial review of the sketch plans or preliminary plats for proposed major subdivisions within 30 days?
Yes.
That's not giving them a lot of time.
Right now, we're doing it with technically 14 days. If they get it in before the next TRC they're going, the current ordinance says 45 days.
Oh, wow.
But pulled language from some other ordinance that was never ours, and it set the timeframes like this, and we don't need timeframes like that because we're not somewhere like Winston-Salem or Greensboro for our TRC. They have to submit it at least 15 days prior to the next TRC meeting, but we may push it back to a point of 30 days, depending on complexity and how many people might need to be involved.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
We feel the 30 days allows for quorum in case we missed a meeting. But at the same time, we don't want to hold up further development issues to a 45-day standard when nothing else is a 45-day standard for us. Sure. Even coming for a special use permit, they only have to get it in 30 days prior, and there's a lot more stuff involved in that than there is with a major subdivision sometimes.
Right.
So we felt 30 days is standard in the ordinance, so 30 days here should be acceptable.
Okay. Fine with me.
The only thing that's clarified is how decisions are written up after they've been made by TRC and how they are delivered, clarifying that they're in writing within a certain period of time that is not a too strict period of time, especially if there's more discussions going on. A statutory reference update because phased development plans have 7 years of vested rights once they're approved, and this had mentioned 5. I don't know if it was just an error at the time or the statute actually changed between 21 and now, but it's actually 7 years, so that's just to clarify that. I think that's it as far as I want to point out. Also clarifying and adding, in the not so common case that someone wants to post a letter of credit or a surety bond for the required costs of road installation, water and sewer installation. We have one in process right now. It clarifies what that is. It's 125% of the total cost estimated evaluation that's evaluated by DOT, Department of Transportation, evaluated by the County Engineering Public Utilities Office for reasonableness. Is this cost reasonable? Plus 25%. So if a company is looking to pre-sell lots, they can do that before the roads are completely installed and the water and sewer completely installed if they post this letter of credit. And it's an irrevocable letter of credit or a surety bond, which until such time as they receive their final approval for road construction, final approval for all water and sewer to every single lot, or any other required improvements, it's not released. We hold it. And God forbid one day we have to try to call one, but we have the power to call it if a performance measure is not met, if it fails. But that adds the county attorney to it for an additional layer of review. It did say community development director, and yes, it should be, but it adds county attorney to be truly sure that it's an above board, legal agreement that everybody's comfortable with.
Okay.
We have one in process right now. How y'all feeling?
Great.
I'm moving. I'm trying. Okay.
Doing good.
The new cell tower special use permit, I think it was in the original ordinance. I don't know, but it needed some serious updating. So I went through and read it and reread it, pulled out references from other ordinances to clarify ours to make sure our practices are not that different from other places. One thing that got missed when this definition, or this special use permit was brought over, was the fall zone definition. So, and the fall zone is a very important thing. If it is a lattice guy-wired tower that is not self-supporting, the fall zone is the height of the tower plus 10%. So if it's 200 feet tall, you're going to have 220 feet of fall zone, because it would be as if the tower were to completely fall perpendicular and then land parallel. So that means de facto the setbacks are going to be 220 feet from any property line. No structures can be placed in there. The whole parcel has to measure at least that. That adds that definition. There always has been a 20% reduction in that for self-supporting monopole towers, because the way that they're engineered to collapse downward. So if a 200-foot monopole goes in, it'll be 220, and then take 10% off of the 220, and 20% off the 220, 20% off the 220, and then that's your setback for your monopole. It also clarifies that, and this is newer language and newer technology, really, that if a tower is specifically built with engineering specifications that say, okay, this tower is 250 feet long, but it is designed through and through by a professional engineer, stamped and certified and sent to us, that the fall zone is actually 140 feet. They can apply for that, but that gets sent to our consulting attorney who does our co-location reviews for review and concurrence. So if the consulting engineer doesn't agree, then we'd have to go back to the table. But it does allow for an exception to the otherwise standard fall zone setback for a self-supporting lattice tower or something like that, as long as there are clear, specific engineering drawings and specifications that show if this thing gets 1.5 inches of ice on it and starts buckling, it's going to buckle down as opposed to over. A lot of it was updating statutory references that were way out of date. A couple things that need to go on the site plan. The fact that, a lot of it in the center is blank, but I added more at the end. Clearing up the fall zone stuff, and then clarifying language about site design requirements to make it more streamlined, what actually is required for site design. Some things referenced landscape barriers in the old reference. The language got missed somehow when it was adopted in the new one, so this clarifies it all. And then tells you what sort of signage you can have. It has to have a certain amount of signage identifying, what it is. It also adds in a performance and tower security decommissioning guarantee, much like what we have in place for residential subdivisions, financial guarantees. A tower is to be established, okay? They go through the whole process. They come through you guys, get the special use permit. In order to erect that tower, they have to submit a decommissioning plan before it's actually approved. It has to be part of that package. And once the tower is ready to be built, they must post and hold a letter of credit or a bond equal to the value of 125% of the tower installation costs at the time. Now, that means that it'll change over time, but it's a more beefy financial guarantee than the $30,000 that was listed before, which was kind of a specific number and I guess average for the time, but costs for these can be all over the place.
Depending on location.
Right. So depending on location.
Helping to get it.
Right. So this clarifies that. It streamlines it. It says whatever the value is when you put this thing in, however much it's going to cost, you got to hold a letter of credit or bond for 125% until the tower becomes inoperable or decommissioned. And it's a
Has anybody balked at that number yet?
No, they might. It's pretty standard. I mean, all the other ordinances I looked at, something like that, I got a couple responses. I posted something on the NC plan. I got a couple of responses there. I found it in a couple of other ordinances, and that's pretty standard. I mean, like I said, even for landscape guarantees, you know, you have to post a bond for the full value of the landscape. So anyway, it makes it clear. And all it's supposed to be approved by the county attorney. And this will be happening sooner than later. We are getting quite a few inquiries about new cell towers. They just wanted to have the basic information about the special use permit, the zoning, you know, what's the process. We've had at least 3 since the beginning of this year or very late last year.
Really?
Yeah. One of which seems to be pretty serious. They've already conducted their balloon test. They have much more to do before they actually apply for
One
it.
over in Madison?
Mm-hmm. They've got a lot more to do before they apply for their permit.
I read the ads for the balloon test.
That's what it was. So, everything sounds
good.
Anything nutty? No? Okay. The last 2, Mr. Marzi worked on these, but they're pretty straightforward. We realized that the use guest house in the ordinance was essentially identical to accessory dwelling unit. It's simply not needed as a permitted use or a guideline anymore, and it's taking up space that just doesn't need to be there.
To be removed.
We think it was.
Beginning with, because guest house was in the old ordinance, AD used the new terminology, and we changed regulations. But we left the definition the same for both, and nobody's applying for guest houses, obviously, because they have much stricter.
Do you remember when Charlie Rakestraw, Gene Robertson, Kevin Berger?
Oh, yeah.
Charlie Hall and I were redoing the revisions for the UDO. I remember that coming up, and the intention, you're right, was to eliminate.
Strike
guest
it.
house.
So that's what we're doing. Yeah.
That's all this text amendment really is.
In favor of the more modern definition of accessory dwelling.
Yeah. But that's all this text amendment really does, is just remove guest house from
Yeah.
62.39 and just add the word into 62.01.
Standards, no changes to the requirements, more or less. They're the exact same that they have been and that we've been permitting since 2021. It just gets rid of duplication. And the shipping containers is Marzi's baby, and I'm going to let him talk to you guys about that. This came up, so.
This was requested by a commissioner to look into. So we looked around and we looked at some other ordinances and we talked to some contemporaries, and basically we'll be blazing kind of a new territory in this, but the attorneys looked at this language. But what we're doing here is the request has been to allow non-residential commercial businesses and churches, things like that, to allow these shipping crates as storage units on the property. Currently, we don't allow shipping containers as storage units, even though some may litter the landscape. A lot of them were pre-1988. Some of them actually aren't in our jurisdictions. They're in the ETJs of the towns, things like that. But the request was to place shipping crates as a possibility for storage containers for commercial businesses, churches, and the like. So we drafted this section here. Since we do allow some type of commercial business or churches in pretty much all of our zones, we put it in as a permitted by right use with restrictions in all of our zoning districts, with the exception of our mobile home district or manufactured home district. Some important parts of this are they can't be upfitted like a regular accessory structure. There's no power, there's no plumbing, there's none of that. We did put in here that the has to be a non-residential principal use on the property. Just because it can be in a highway commercial zone doesn't mean we don't have houses in highway commercial either. So just because they're zoned highway commercial doesn't mean they're a non-residential use. So it's got to be a non-residential principal use.
Apply to a legal non-conforming use, let's say a business operation in the RA district?
If it's like an old guest family, yeah, I would say it would. Couldn't discriminate from legal non-conforming. You just can't add to the non-conformity, which this wouldn't be doing that. Must be in the rear to the side of the property, can't be in the front. Must be screened from public view, those kind of things. The attorney did recommend throwing in there a percentage, I forget. Yeah, how much, here we go. Total square footage of the containers being used for storage may not exceed 10% of the square footage of the principal structure being served. So, if you have a 1,000 square foot building, you can't put 5,000 square feet of shipping containers out there. So it's to limit them just being relied on solely.
So rather than a number of containers, it's tied to the square footage of the principal structure.
Yeah, and the way we looked at that is in some other places that do allow these types of things, that is the way they did approach it. We don't limit accessory structures in our ordinance. You can have however many that'll fit on your property. So I felt it'd be unfair to limit these as accessory structures when they could just go ahead and get the same 20 by 30 prefab construction unit and have many more of them.
Have 6 of them on your parcel?
Yeah, so without restricting the number of accessory structures, period, I didn't feel it was proper to us do it by number. But I did feel that because they would have to screen it, it would be keeping it to a minimum would probably be best. So we stuck with 10%.
Oddball question. Watch a lot of off-gridder shows, so that prevents somebody from coming in, taking shipping containers and putting them next to each other and making a house out of it, right?
They can, actually. If the Department of Insurance, an engineer has to sign off on something like that, that's an approved construction material.
Oh, okay.
But an engineer has to notify the Department of Insurance. The Department of Insurance has to submit a letter that they would insure a structure structured that way as long as the engineer designs it to residential building code standards. So they can modify shipping crates for such a use that just has to be modified to the point that it meets North Carolina building code standards, which is very difficult to do. You might as well just build a stick-built house at that point. But they can do that currently without any of this.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so while we don't allow them as accessory structures, they can be your principal structure.
I only know of one that was pursued fairly seriously a few years ago, but then the gentleman got about halfway into it and realized what we just said, that it's actually going to cost more than building a site-built home, and he gave up on it.
There's several of those types of things around the state, little accessory dwelling unit size. There's a commercial development in Wilmington that's made of nothing but shipping containers. So it is doable, not very feasible or practical.
The reason I saw one, it was a veterans community, and instead of doing tiny houses, they're taking shipping containers and reconfiguring them and putting veterans in them, which I thought was pretty cool by itself, but I just raised that question, because I've seen them on a lot of off-gridder sites, so.
That could totally happen here.
If you do it in the state, you have to let the Department of Insurance has to sign off on it, and it has to be an engineer or licensed architect has to stamp it.
Is the grain bins, you see them doing them living in, fall under the same category?
I don't know about that.
I don't know, but I don't think they would.
I've done work on one.
Be the same building
It was
standards.
actually a grain bin.
Yeah.
You're not talking about a silo.
Old tobacco barns converted into apartments and stuff too. So I assume a grain bin or something like that could be done as long as it's still engineered. And I assume the Department of Insurance would still have to sign off on it. Because otherwise you might not be able to insure your house.
I would think so.
And she, like what Lynn said, she actually had probably 300,000 or 400,000 into it.
Oof.
Because of it was one-off on everything.
I mean, if you got money,
Everything was circled.
if you're kind of bored and got money to burn, go for it. We'll help you do it, but you're going to have all those things lined up to do it.
So you can do tobacco barns to live in as well.
Yep.
You could re-engineer just about anything as long as it gets approved by a professional engineer
Ideas,
or
don't you?
architect and is built to North Carolina residential code, except for things like storage units, which we get a lot. People want to try to convert them because they're inexpensive and
That's
they
a
look
good
like
one.
cute little
I was
houses.
gonna suggest that.
But they're essentially impossible to convert to single-family residence without taking them apart and rebuilding them anyway.
Right.
So,
Back on,
that's right.
on this, like I said, we did the best we could with what is out there, but many communities don't allow these as permanent. They're usually allowed as temporary. So these regulations would, like I said, would be kind of blazing a trail.
We occasionally blaze trails, not a lot, but occasionally. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
John?
So these units, these storage units could be conjoined.
They could. Well, they could as long as the conjoined size didn't exceed 10% of the primary structure. Unless they're trying to do something like build it for residential purposes, they could join them and get the professional engineer and all that.
Could they be made subterranean?
I've seen a green barn converted before.
Nobody can really think of a good reason why not.
But again, like this is really just for the businesses to be able to slab one of these down and use it for storage.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'd want to spend that kind of money on that, but yeah, I mean, there's nothing in this regulation that would prevent that. I mean, there's nothing now that prevents you from not burying a regular storage building either. So, I mean, we don't have that, we don't regulate into that kind of area.
Through in 2018, 19, and then again last year, people are calling, they want storm cellars.
Again, though, I do point out that we are not allowing electrical connections. We're not allowing mechanical connections. So, I mean, if they did, I mean, they'd just be suffocating themselves.
No way they could actually habitate it. It would just be for storage and storage only, or
Even if they made it underground, they wouldn't have any actual power to it. So
no water, no power, no.
Are you talking about storage container underground?
Yeah.
I assume that's what he's meant by subterranean.
I've seen that's not a good thing.
I wouldn't do it, but we don't have any regulations against it, but we don't have any regulations against anything like that to begin with.
Do these units require tethering to the ground in some?
That would be determined by the engineer or architect. They would have to be secured to the ground.
Not for this situation. We're not
for
talking
the
about for a
underground.
house.
No, I'm not, but it would be for a house or something like that. For this situation, no, that does not require engineering approval for tie down or tethering as far as.
I mean, if
being
y'all
used
want to
for the
add
storage.
tethering in there, we could, but
Bad idea. I mean, it wouldn't hurt.
If we do that, I would suggest trying to figure out a way to do it that matches something in the building code somehow.
Mobile homes have to be, so I mean.
Being arbitrary, something that meets a minimum wind tolerance or minimum anchoring.
The minimum weight, these are a lot heavier than.
Oh, yeah, they're massively heavy. I mean, we could add something like that if you guys feel strongly about it.
you give us the language because, like I said, there's nothing out there similar to that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you took mobile home tie-down standards of this, you're putting residential standards onto a non-residential use at that point.
Yeah.
So like what Lynn was saying with mobile homes wouldn't work, and I'm not aware of any commercial tie-down outside of flood zone stuff.
They're built
I
that
don't
way
think
because they come across.
Putting something in there, I just don't know what the language would be.
No.
Some specific language you guys want to come up with between now and the time the
I think
Board of
the issue
Commissioners-
needs to ripen. We need to have an occurrence of something happen before we, well, let's
I
not
agree.
anticipate a problem that we don't know exists yet.
It's a good point.
That being said, we have heard your presentation, and I would like to move that we go ahead and recommend that the commissioners adopt these changes.
Second.
The motion made and seconded to approve a recommendation to the commissioners. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, like sign. There's no opposition, so the motion carries. And we will be making a recommendation to the commissioners to approve these changes. Motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Beat
I
Julie
had
to
my
that.
mouth open.
I was